This is Popping the Bubble with hosts Sandra Ponce de Leon and Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Paul Gambill, CEO and co-founder of Nori, and you're listening to Popping the Bubble.
Hey, Paul. Thanks so much for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me on.
Full disclosure, your Nori is actually a client, but I love what you guys are doing, so really excited to talk about that. And we are actually recording here at this lovely collaborative workspace called The Vault. It's a collaborative workspace and innovation hub based here in the heart of Silicon Valley, San Francisco. The Vault celebrates entrepreneurs and innovators from around the world and provides them with the right tools and support to grow better and faster. We have really been enjoying our day so far here, so thank you, The Vault, for having us. So yeah, jumping into Nori, would love to just in your own words, tell us a little bit about what Nori is doing.
Sure. Nori is on a mission to reverse climate change. And the way that we are trying to do that is we're trying to enable the growth of a new industry that does what's called carbon removal. So that's removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and permanently storing it somewhere in the ground. Mm-hmm. The way that we're doing that is we're making a marketplace that makes it easier for people to pay for carbon removal to take place.
Very cool. Yeah, I actually, before working with Nori, I had no idea that, beyond photosynthesis and the natural ways and planting trees, I had no idea that carbon removal was actually something that was even possible from a technological perspective.
Yeah, it's the concept of it has been around for a very long time, but it hasn't really reached any sort of mainstream acceptance for a whole host of reasons. One of which is that for a long time, climate scientists were sort of wary of talking about carbon removal as an option because they didn't want to give an excuse to emitters to say that, okay, we can just keep on emitting and then we can just remove what we need to, because we do also need to reduce our emissions.
Right.
Nori doesn't quite agree with that philosophy. In fact, we're very much of the opinion that we should be able to build a system using better technology that allows us to have our cake and eat it too. Like the emissions that have been generated from burning fossil fuels and the agriculture and crops that we're able to grow because of changing land use, has enabled many, many wonderful things for humanity around the world. It's lifted people out of poverty all across the world. It's enabled a much higher quality standard of living. So we don't want to castigate emissions or carbon dioxide itself. It's not a bad thing.
So we don't have to stop driving cars.
No. We think of it like carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions are like a waste problem, like a garbage problem. And if you think about it, we're not trying to live in a garbage-free society right now. No one is advocating for that at any serious level. And so what we do is we collectively in our cities pay for the collection and removal and responsible storage of our waste, recycling what we can and storing what we can't. And Nori proposes that we treat our greenhouse gases, and especially carbon dioxide, the same way.
How are you enabling that?
Well, there are a lot of different ways to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. One of the most impactful methods is through agricultural changes, farming practices changes. Mm-hmm. If farmers stop tilling or reduce the amount of tilling that they do and use cover crops on their fields, rotate those cover crops, they can promote the growth of bacteria in the soil that end up pulling down CO2 and storing it in the soil. And it's actually a really good thing because that increases the quality of that topsoil. So you produce better, more nutritious crops over time. They retain water better. And you're storing CO2 in the ground. And it's actually reversing a process that's emitted a lot of greenhouse gases. A very significant percentage, and I can't recall the exact number right now, of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have been emitted because of what we call land use changes. So it's been tilling the ground, stirring it up, and releasing those gases that are stored in the soil.
Right, and I always thought that was actually a good farming practice to till the soil. You always hear about tilling the soil.
Right.
Well, Here it's good because it's effective at increasing yields.
I see.
But that can only go on for so long, and the past few generations of farmers have noticed a severe drop in the quality of their soil, and so they have to use more and more fertilizer every season in order to produce the same amount as they had the previous year. So killing is a short-term benefit, but a long-term negative consequence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, but I imagine that for a farmer to actually change his or her practice from incorporating these, methods that are not necessarily great from a carbon release perspective to this more, it sounds like it's actually an organic farming practice. I mean, that takes time. So how would you, how are you going to get farmers to agree to this?
Well, there are a lot of farmers who are already doing this, and they've been taking sample data, recording the changes and effects that it's had upon the soil for decades, in fact. But you're right that it is an increased cost for farmers in the first few years. But what's been found is that after a period of time ranging from 3 to 7 years, they start to see a turn and get a higher ROI for this change in practice than they would have otherwise.
Hmm.
So it's a matter of figuring out how to bridge that gap. Those first 3 years are going to be more difficult financially. And that's one area where Nori can help with this. We are fundamentally measuring removed carbon dioxide, creating and issuing what we're calling carbon removal certificates to those suppliers who remove CO2. And then those certificates can be sold in our marketplace in exchange for our token that we're calling the Nori token. So this is a blockchain application, and it's a cryptocurrency that we're creating to facilitate this. And one Nori token will always purchase 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide removed. So one Nori token for one carbon removal certificate.
Very, very cool. So you talked about the credits, and I've heard about carbon credits. I think we've all heard about carbon reduction credits. Is that what they're called?
Yeah.
Yeah. How is
They
Nori
have
different?
different names. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the main differences is that most of these carbon reduction credits that you hear about, whether that's through the California market or in the EU or elsewhere, are for the most part avoided emissions. So if you are building a wind farm or you're building a dairy digester at a dairy farm, you're avoiding a certain amount of, or you're claiming that you're avoiding a certain amount of carbon dioxide emitted. And another thing that can happen is if you're in a cap and trade regime, like in California, and
Right.
you're regulated by that law, you're given what are called allowances. So you're some energy company and you're allowed to emit X number of tons of CO2 per year. And let's say it's 100 for convenience sake, and you only emit 80 tons. That 20-ton difference you are allowed to actually sell as allowances that you could have emitted but you didn't. So you sell those in the cap and trade market to an emitter who might have a cap of 100 and they emitted 120. So they need to offset those extra 20, and so they purchase those from you. Now there are problems.
They've purchased credits for me not emitting, which I never would have emitted, or I'm incentivized to emit. Is that emit?
If you're the first emitter and you emit fewer than 100 tons,
Right.
those are allowances that you sell to
Right.
the emitter.
Okay. Right. So I've got the 20 tons extra I sell to the emitter.
Right.
Okay,
But
got
here's
it.
the problem. When both of those emitters report into the regulatory bodies, they both report a reduction in emissions.
Oh.
But it's really only happened once. So what that means is that these credits are being double counted. And that reduces the overall value. So if double counting is happening, then that means that the credits that are being sold don't actually represent 1 ton of CO2. And so the price that is being paid for them and the transaction volume that people report on and analyze for this isn't accurate
Hmm.
because of this bad accounting problem.
Right.
And that's one of the specific things that Nori is going to fix because of our transparent blockchain-backed ledger that records every single transaction and every single action of carbon removal.
Mm-hmm.
So in our market, it will be easily verifiable by any observer that a carbon removal certificate actually represents 1 real ton of carbon dioxide removed.
How does one go about verifying 1 ton of carbon dioxide removed?
Yeah, that's a tricky thing, and it's different for every single methodology that might take place. So we've talked about agriculture. Just really quick, there are other methods. You could plant trees. You can do
Right.
direct air capture. So that's industrial machinery that's pulling in atmospheric air and then separating out the CO2.
Yeah, that's really
from the
cool.
other methods. Each of these requires different methods for measuring it. So I could talk about agriculture because that's what we're working on defining right now.
Right.
So we're working with academics at Colorado State University who have been operating a modeling program in conjunction with the USDA for a number of years, where they take soil samples that are reported in, and they're able to create a model so that if you say, I have a farm in this particular county or in this particular zip code inside that county, and here are all the different factors around it. Here is the size of it. These are the different types of practices that I use on my farm, the amount of water that I use, et cetera, et cetera. They can take that information into their model and then compare it with other samples that are taken around in the area, and then report back, okay, based on this information, you have sequestered this much of carbon dioxide equivalent gases in your soil. So they're acting as a data aggregator for us. And Nori will be working with independent third-party verifiers who will work with the farmers to measure this data and get it incorporated into this model, and then report that, yes, we believe this happened. And we're looking at ways to ensure that these verifiers have a fiduciary responsibility to report this accurately, in the same way that we trust CPAs to report accounting accurately.
And this is something that can be understood just by simply measuring the soil.
It's actually, no, it's not quite that simple.
Oh, okay.
I thought it was. When I first got started in this, I thought, well, okay, there's got to be easy technology. You just stick a sensor in the ground and you say, okay, there's this much CO2 or this much carbon content in it right now. And then a year from now, we measure the difference. And that's how I thought it would work.
Right.
That actually, unfortunately, is not so simple. And one of the problems is that taking soil samples every year, there's a range of estimation error, and the difference that would occur over a year is smaller than that estimation error range. So you can't actually do it that way. So you have to use these models that look at what is everything in the surrounding area done. So it's under the same like regional geographic conditions. What's happened there, and how do we compare that to that? And that's what they've been working on for over 2 decades is to improve the quality of that data modeling.
Yeah, amazing. Very cool. And so the marketplace is really going to have 3 different entities involved with it: the suppliers, the buyers, and then these verifiers.
That's right. Yeah, the verifiers are this sort of third party in this transaction.
I want to ask a really basic question. We've covered a lot of the detailed stuff, and I love what you guys are doing, but we're talking about cleaning up carbon from the environment and the blockchain. Just give me the super basic, I have no idea what either one of those things is, so that someone who's like, my mouth is open, and, so give us that thing.
Okay, so the blockchain is basically a distributed ledger of transactions. The first ever blockchain was created when Bitcoin was created in 2008, 2009, and launched. And Bitcoin is just a currency that records every single transaction that ever happens. And every participant in the network has a copy of every single transaction that happens. And so it can be easily proved that if I spend a Bitcoin and pay you with it, you can't. I can't then go spend that same Bitcoin with someone else. The distributed ledger keeps track of who owns what at what time, and updates every single transaction. And these transactions get grouped together into what's called a block, and then the blocks are chained together one after another. So that's where the name blockchain comes from.
Right.
what we're doing is different from Bitcoin in that every single measurement of the carbon removed, the creation of the carbon removal certificate, the transfer of ownership from the supplier to the buyer, the payment from the buyer to the supplier, every single one of those transactions happens in this distributed ledger on the blockchain, so that it's very simple to trace backwards exactly what occurred and what took place. And we're working on designing the interface in our application so that anyone could come in and see that and trace that easily. That's what a blockchain is. Now, on the carbon side, so just to go back to super basics, climate change, global warming, is being caused by an increase in the concentration of heat-trapping greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Those greenhouse gases get up there because we burn fossil fuels, the land use changes that I mentioned. These concentrations have increased from around 280 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
This was when?
To over 405, 410 parts per million today.
But for what's the starting point?
Oh, sorry, prior to the Industrial Revolution.
Okay, got it.
So that's actually a very significantly large change, and that's what's been driving the warming that's been happening around the world, which then causes other climatic changes, ice melting, and so on.
Acidification of the oceans.
Yes, yes, all those things. Now, with more greenhouse gases, more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we have this natural carbon cycle that stores CO2 in the oceans, it stores it in rocks, it stores it in dirt, in soil, in the ground, and is constantly moving around. But we're injecting so much more extra in there that we're overloading all of these natural carbon sinks. So that's where ocean acidification comes in. And what Nori is looking at doing is saying there are lots of different approaches that people are taking to reduce the amount of CO2 that's getting emitted to the atmosphere. So that's conversion over to renewable energy and that sort of thing. And that's great. We're thrilled that people are working on that. Fewer people are looking at, all right, we've already put up a lot of excess carbon dioxide. We need to figure out what to do with that. We need to pull it back down somehow, store it. We estimate it's anywhere in the range from 1 to 1.5 trillion tons of carbon dioxide. If we want to restore that atmospheric concentration back to 300 parts per million, so much closer to what it was before the Industrial Revolution.
Hey everyone, this is Sandra from Popping the Bubble, and we're coming to you from the Vault in San Francisco.
What's the Vault?
Well, thank you for asking, Pete. The Vault is a full-stack innovation ecosystem and collaborative workspace.
Full-stack innovation, ecosystem, collaborative work. That sounds super techy.
Well, you're right there, Pete. Full stack means that in addition to being a great place to collaborate and network for startups, the Vault has a full suite of startup advisory services, such as fundraising help, legal, IP, and marketing services.
Let's also mention how the Vault works with corporations through Viz, the Vault Innovation Services, and VIA, which is the Vault Innovation Academy, which also offers courses in developing innovation at scale.
The Vault celebrates innovators from around the world and provides entrepreneurs with the right tools and support to grow better and faster.
This segment of Popping the Bubble is brought to you by The Vault. Thanks to Kevin and his team for all the amazing work they do to fuel innovation in Silicon Valley and across the globe.
Wow, and so what you're saying is that us changing our consumption patterns or moving to more renewable energy sources, that's not enough. We've got to do more.
That's right. It's not enough. Even if we were to shut off all sources of emissions tomorrow, we would still see an increase in warming. We would still see an increase in the atmospheric concentration of CO2 because there's a lagging effect. These molecules hang out in the atmosphere for around 100 years or so. So it's too late, really. We've kind of blown our carbon budget.
Wow.
We can't just scale back our emissions. We have to take action to remove it.
It's almost overwhelming when you say it like that. Like we've already gone past the point of no return, and I think that what's amazing about what Nori is doing in your vision, is to actually, the intent of reversing it. I mean, how did you make the leap from just to tackle something just so enormous and huge and overwhelming and kind of unfathomable? How did you make the leap from like this? Okay, this is a point of despair to a point of optimism?
Well, around 3 years ago, I was working on a small business that wasn't really going anywhere, and I decided that I wanted to work on something bigger and more important, and especially something that would attract other people to work on it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek's views on this. He has my very favorite TED Talk where he talks about the power of why,
Right.
and he like people are attracted to why you do things, not what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And I, at the time, this was in like spring of 2015, I was reading an article in some magazine about how climate scientists were becoming very depressed because no one was listening to them.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about it. Well, okay, there's a lot of stuff that people are doing right now. It's clearly not happening fast enough, but it's also like starting like there are very real effects from climate change right now. Like you can make a strong argument that what's been happening in the Middle East since 2010 with the rise of ISIS and the civil wars in Syria and so on are almost directly caused by climate change because very severe extreme droughts that are atypical forced people out of rural areas into the cities that put more strain on the infrastructure, which created the situation.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
it's real. It's affecting us now. And I'm an engineer by training. And so I think about how to solve problems, how to build solutions to problems rather than just making them less bad,
Mm-hmm.
which is that making it less bad it's just not something that I like to do, but I'm glad that other people do it. These things have to happen in combination. So I got interested in thinking, well, okay, we put all these greenhouse gases up in the atmosphere. How do we pull that back down? And how do we do so in a way that aligns the incentives to create an industry that does this and grows and expands and scales? So I started a meetup group in Seattle called Carbon Removal Seattle, and we we self-educated ourselves, learning a lot about carbon removal technologies. We networked with other groups around the world who were interested in this, met all the people who were working on it, and eventually got to the point where the blockchain technology caught up. Is now both of these things are at the same sort of nascent early stage where we can build something that utilizes both all these different technologies for carbon removal and this accounting ledger that also provides a very interesting financial mechanism. And now we have the opportunity to incentivize all sorts of new activity, new entrepreneurs entering the carbon removal space, creating new companies that do it, new jobs, new value streams.
Mm-hmm.
And we can build a future system where carbon removal is just sort of embedded into everyday life. Like imagine if you are driving your car, you pull up to the gas pump and you fill it and asks, do you want to offset the emissions from the gas that you just purchased? You say yes, and just instantly purchases carbon removal certificates that are available for sale in the Nori market.
Yeah.
Or you are playing a mobile game that has some in-app purchase that does something in the game, but it also purchases a little bit of a carbon removal certificate and assigns that to you. It, these all sorts of little activities like this can happen in a much more easy and automatic way. And so what we're doing is we're making this process very, very efficient and easy. We're removing the barriers to entry so that more people will do it. It's possible to create new value for people while also producing a positive social outcome by removing carbon dioxide.
Wow. I love it. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. It's funny because we actually the last conversation that we had was with Joe Letwak, who is the CEO and founder of a company called Lingrove, and they have created a carbon material made out of flax and resin, and they are creating all sorts of things from guitars to furniture. So it seems like they would be, kind of a perfect there'd be a perfect connection to the market. So
yes, that's very cool.
yeah, it's nice that we're on this sort of same train of thought, and I think a lot of people have kind of come around, like they're looking for solutions to these big, grand problems of humanity, and it's
right. It's a problem of incentives. Like
mm-hmm.
we've had the ability to take action on global warming and climate change for decades. And it's only gotten more expensive as we delayed taking action. And governments clearly are not going to be the ones solving this. They're just not willing to do it.
Right.
All these different methods for removing carbon dioxide could happen, but who's going to pay for it? It's a really important question. So if we're asking who's going to pay for it, well, then we need to find people who are interested in purchasing it because it provides some value. And if carbon dioxide can be used as an economic input to creating products, whether that's like the example you just gave, where they're growing flax, which pulls carbon dioxide out through photosynthesis, and then they're using that product to make something. We've been looking at how construction materials can do the same thing, embed the CO2 in new buildings as we build them. We've talked with a company called Interface that makes a carbon negative carpet. There are companies interested in making carbon negative shoes. There are all sorts of ways to use this thing that we think of as a waste product, but we can recycle it into something else and create new value. And that's when people will start spending money on acquiring this product. So, like, do you know how there are companies that are interested in going to landfills and trying to recycle like rare earth metals out of them because it's cheaper and easier to get them there than it is to mine them in new mines around the world?
Out of landfills?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I had no idea.
So this is kind of the same concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So interesting. And I love, the concept. I mean, well, I don't love it. I mean, but it's kind of like we have to take matters into our own hands, right?
Yeah.
To your point, the government is not doing anything. And, we also had another fascinating conversation with a guy named Ben Bartlett, who is running he's the vice mayor of Berkeley, and he's running the city of Berkeley's first ICO to, put their municipal bonds on the blockchain, and also to create, it's a wealth creation vehicle for funding these things that the community needs and wants. But because of what's happening with the tax reduction, the corporate tax reduction rate that was just implemented, those companies are no longer incentivized to, do these things for the community. So it's the community now, the social impact investing. So the communities have to take these things into their own hands. I mean, talk a little bit about how you see the blockchain and how it's going to impact our society going forward. If you can get a little bit philosophical there.
Sure. So pretend like it's the year 1994.
Okay.
And there are people talking about this new internet thing. There are academics at universities who are sending emails to each other. And some guy in Switzerland at CERN just created this thing called the web, the World Wide Web, and they use this programming language that he called hypertext markup language to make documents that you put on the web that you can browse with applications that look at them. Like that's where we are right now with blockchain. And think of how impactful the internet has been on everyday life for consumers, for businesses, for organizations, communities, people connecting with people around the world, the sharing of knowledge and information,
right.
the movement of money and finance around the world. All these things have been enabled. Yeah. All these things have been enabled by interconnected networks that exist because of the internet. And you can think of the blockchain as the backbone for the next iteration of this. The blockchain is a really fascinating thing. Like, it wasn't intended to be this way. The pseudonymous creators of creators of Bitcoin were just trying to create a digital currency online. But you can generalize these things in the way that like Nori is, where we're not making just a currency, we're making all these things that record all of these different actions that happen. There are so many different ways of doing that. What a blockchain fundamentally enables is distribution of trust. Think of, we have all of these institutions in our society that are meant to provide trust because we don't necessarily know the other parties that we're interacting with. If you buy a house, you put money in escrow before it transfers over to the owner, and you make sure that you receive what you're paying for and so on. Or we have governments that manage property title records, or we have governments that regulate our financial institutions and so on. It's because of a lack of trust. But we can design systems that use this distributed ledger because everything is open and transparent, where we can hold other people accountable on the blockchain. And the blockchain is what makes that possible. So right now, we're in the super early days of building the infrastructure for all sorts of applications. And in 1994, the idea of us having this conversation right now over the internet using Skype, or the idea of watching movies sent to your set-top box that's connected to the internet and connected to your TV on Netflix, like that would have been insane to them.
Yeah.
Back and that's where we are right now. So they're just so the potential for how these will shape society is incredibly massive. And it's almost too difficult to say what will happen, but I'm confident that it is going to fundamentally restructure many things and make society a far more fair and equitable place to live.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it does feel that enthusiasm and that from those early days of the internet and the possibilities and what's going to happen next, and how it's going to transform society, and I love what you guys are doing, and yeah, it's amazing to think that you're leveraging a technology to solve a global issue like reversing climate change.
That's right, and it's not just leveraging technology. We're leveraging people's self-interest, and this is more of a philosophical thing for me. But I've always been of the belief that if the incentives are aligned, so that people want to, we're all motivated by our own self-interest, and if we can line up the actions of a bunch of individuals taking action that help themselves, and it just so happens that the collective outcome from all of those produces some positive, good social outcome, then all the better. So then everyone wins.
Right.
Everyone's getting what they want, and we're making a positive difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And what does that mean for the established power structure that are in play? What's I don't know. It just kind of it's a very interesting topic to ponder. We've been talking about it a lot with a lot of the blockchain entrepreneurs. What is this? What's going to happen? What is are these entrenched power structures going to revolt against this, or pull back the tides that are already in play?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some amount of risk that the large, powerful institutions are probably seeing now. I don't believe that we are headed towards a truly 100% decentralized internet. We're not going to see Facebook and Google go away, not anytime soon. But I think that we will see things adapting. And one of some of the really interesting use cases for blockchains have been in the cases of authoritarian, totalitarian governments that are harming their citizens. So when there were bank runs in Cyprus, I think in 2013 or so, people were using Bitcoin to move money around. When Venezuela has been devaluing their currency significantly so that people can't afford to buy anything, and they've been using cryptocurrencies to enable monetary transactions and trade and get the goods that they need. So these cryptocurrencies and blockchains provide freedom for people, just at its most basic level. They enable people to be more free, whether that's from authoritarian governments or from authoritarian corporations. They're all kind of the same.
I guess I'd love to kind of hear like what's next for Nori. What's coming up as you start to build this marketplace out. What are you guys looking to ahead on the horizon?
We're very much in progress building our application, working with farmers and suppliers to get inventory available for sale, working with buyers to make sure that there's demand, they're ready to go. There will have been this awesome, amazing conference that happened in Seattle where we're bringing together different market participants. These are buyers, suppliers, farmers, data aggregators, verifiers, researchers, blockchain experts, and just all sorts of interested parties. And it's meant for us to kind of debut our products. We'll be demoing a prototype of it. We'll also be looking to collect feedback from people, because everything that we do, we want to have feedback from the community at large. We don't want to just be out there defining everything ourselves. We want to build this collectively. Mm-hmm. And so this is our first like major action in public. Our goal is to have this marketplace operational, at least on a small scale, by the end of the year, by the end of 2018. So that's what we're primarily focusing on over the summer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I definitely love working with you guys. I love what you guys are doing. I feel like I get educated every time I hear one of your amazing podcasts. We should mention the podcast, which is called the Reversing Climate Change Podcast. And that goes out on a weekly basis. And people can also find you on Twitter at Nori.echo. So Nori, NORIDOTECO, as well as on Facebook and Reddit and some other social channels. You guys are blogging regularly on Medium. Lots of ways to find you and get educated about what you guys are doing. Is there anything that you wanted to end with, Paul, that perhaps we didn't get a chance to cover?
No, I think we've covered everything. You asked good questions. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, it's been great. Thank you so much for joining us. And definitely people that are listening, check out Nori.com. Get involved if possible. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for having me.